Hello.
Hello, hello.
Anastasia, we're doing another behind the scenes or deep dive on crypto PR. I think the last one went really well. What are your thoughts when we did the live Q&A?
Yeah, I think it was so much fun. And there were so many good questions that came in and some funny questions that came in too. I really appreciated everybody interacting with it and asking some of the tough questions.
I think one of what I remember, one of the biggest questions was how do I get my story if XYZ? And everyone was referring to like how do I get my story out there for free? So I know you put together something today. It's going to be a whole webinar workshop on how to do exactly just this. So I'm really excited, and let me make sure I share this with a few people that were in the live Q&A 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one. It's a common question that people ask, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes that you don't always see. And so I feel like this is like a bit of a peek behind the curtain into how some of this works. And if you want to do it yourself and you want to take the time, you've got some tips on how to do it. But also, we're here to help with that too if you need it.
Yeah, I think we typically just see like the end result of, okay, you got my story into the block or Forbes. Can you do this for all my other 7 stories and do it in the next 3 days?
Exactly.
Cool.
All right. So, yeah, today we're going to talk about a few little things, what the difference really is between earned and paid media, how to work with reporters, and then setting your priorities straight. Sometimes what you think is really important isn't as important to the reporters. And so you got to adjust the way that you pitch and the way that you tell your stories to really highlight what they're looking for. Then I'll talk a little bit about how to do your announcements and how to pitch. And I've got a little case study with Barabaddies in there too.
I should share this with the Barabaddies, actually. Good reminder.
Yeah. I think they'll be happy to see themselves in here. And I did get permission to talk about this announcement from the Barabaddy team. I didn't just like put this in here for nothing. So yeah, wonderful team to work with. But a little bit about myself. I've been in comms and PR for about 10 years now. Moved into crypto in 2021 during the NFT boom, which was a really interesting time to get into the industry. Have obviously seen a few cycles since then. And over that time have had the pleasure of working with over 50 crypto projects from literally all over the place. Some of the big names that are like household names that everybody knows, some of the smaller teams that have grown into larger names as well. So it's been really, really fun over the last several years to get into the industry and do all of that. But now I've been at Hype for a little over a year. I'm head of PR, so kind of run the department, help line things up with clients, get everything done with my team. I've got a wonderful team. There's Emma Byrne, Rachel Sachs, who kind of floats a little bit in between. And then there's Sasha Berry, who does founder branding as well. And then, yeah, I've had clients published pretty much everywhere that you could think of or that you'd want to be, and still doing it today. So
what type of PR did you do before crypto? Was it tech?
It was actually, I was working in manufacturing at the time. So technically, yes, there was some tech. There was some very low tech stuff that I was talking about, some very high tech stuff. When the pandemic hit, I actually worked with AbbVie to get the news out about the vaccine and all sorts of stuff with that. So it was an interesting progression, but kind of a natural one to go into crypto.
Cool.
Okay, so earned media versus paid media. What exactly does earned mean? It means that you are getting published for free in a news outlet. So you don't have to pay anything. It's going to show up organically. That's what we also call it, is organic media. And it tells a really compelling story or it breaks exciting news. And it's got to do either one of those two things or both of those two things if you're going to get it published for free. And because it's out there, because a reporter chose to report on you, it builds extra trust and credibility, not only with your community and your investors, but also with other reporters and people in the media as well. But I will say it requires a lot of effort and time and knowing the people in the industry and knowing the stories that are hot and want to be told. And it's not guaranteed. Because it's earned, you can't guarantee it.
And I think this is the type of media that most people are looking for because it's the most prized, right? This is the organic, free stories that we're talking about. And I remember a lot of the questions from the live Q&A was about how do I get the story out without paying all of this money to these publications?
Yep. Well, there's a way to do it, but you got to be crafty. On the other side, though, is paid media. And of course, that means that you have to pay to play. It's going to be a lot more predictable, though. And of course, it's guaranteed. It's predictable in the sense that you get to control your message. You get to control the timing, where it's published. But because it's predictable and guaranteed, nobody is writing about it organically. So there's a little bit of that give and take there. But it's going to show up in a different area on the site, and it's going to show up with a sponsored tag or in like a press release section on the page. So it will be easily identifiable as paid content. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It's always good to get out there, and there are times where it makes sense to do paid media. But like you said, Emily, it's kind of worth its weight in gold when you get that organic piece.
I think in crypto especially too, running paid ads for like an airdrop campaign always just makes it, I'm not saying that paid media in this context where you're paying for an article in a publisher is directly related to paid ads, but anytime that sponsored or paid tag is there or advertising tag is there, all the readers and people that see it instantly know like, okay, you paid for this. And I know that adds some type of signal that isn't as compelling as if you earn the story.
Yeah. But I think a good signal that it sends too is if you really want to be in a publication and it's like your dream place to be, maybe you might want to try some pay to play first and then put your foot in the door so that they remember that you've worked with them before. There are reasons to do it, but earned is best always.
That's interesting that you're looking at it from a social capital and relationship standpoint. Cool. Sorry, I keep clicking too fast.
No, you're all good. One thing that I do want to note about both earned or paid media is that either way, there's going to be some form of a sale. If you're purchasing the coverage, there's going to be that, actual transaction with money. But if you're earning that story, you're going to have to sell it really well so that it gets picked up and people want to write about it, they want to talk about it, and they want to share it. No matter what, though, there's going to be a sale. It's a transaction, and you got to sell it really well.
I want to add to this too. One of the first books I read when I was starting my marketing career was To Sell is Human. And the whole premise of it is everything is a sale. Even if you're a parent, you need to sell to your child why they should be eating vegetables or doing their homework. So I think sale sometimes has this negative connotation, but it's essentially how do we encourage people to do something? And they're in the context of PR, it's how do we get this story placed? And how do we make sure it reaches the right people from the reporter down to the readers?
Exactly. All right. So next section, we're going to talk about working with reporters and demystifying some of the myths that are out there or questions that people commonly ask. So first and foremost, each of the reporters has a personal interest and a niche, whether it's like AI, DeFi, gaming, RWAs. Maybe they're a Solana reporter or an Ethereum reporter or specifically an L2 reporter. Maybe they specifically like to report on fundraisers or, what's going on with regulations. There's a number of different niches that these reporters write within, and they also just have their personal interests and things that they like to talk about. Make note of that. Notice that. See what they're writing about. Pay attention, because pitching the wrong pitch to a really, really solid reporter is going to make you memorable, but in all the wrong ways. So really get to know who these people are, what they like to write about, and what they're most interested in. But no matter what they're interested in, it's still an attention economy. They have a job to bring the most readers that they possibly can to their site, to their story. And so they have to have the most interesting story that they possibly can. That means that liking your story or thinking that you're a really cool project or you have something really neat going on doesn't mean that they're going to cover you. They still have to go through their editors. They're going to have to pitch the pitch that I sent to them to their editors and ask if they can cover the story first. So it's really, really important to understand that there is no guarantee. We can't necessarily ask for favors either. Relationships will carry you a long way, but a favor isn't a thing when it comes to earned media. Reporters have their kind of codes of conduct, and they are meant to be neutral. They are meant to be reporting what's going on and not like skewing things. So it's unethical actually to give a favor to a PR person. So no, I cannot call in a favor. I'm sorry. But reporters are also incredibly busy. For every single reporter out there, there are 6 to 7 PR people. They're getting over 100 pitches in their inboxes every single day. So we need to give them their ample time to look through the information and decide whether or not they want to write the story. We cannot come to them like 2 days before an announcement and expect them to drop everything and their editors to drop everything. And, you know, they are spending their paid hours to write a story for you for free. They're not obligated to write about you. There may be, you know, something else that comes up or something that's more important that they need to write about. So when they do that, we need to be gracious. We need to be thankful and be incredibly nice to them, because that's a huge part of building those relationships and making sure you get published again.
Just so people understand, are the reporters the first gate that you need to unlock? So you give them a pitch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then do they then need to get approval from the editor before they write the story? Or do they write the story and then the editor is the final approval?
Usually they go straight to their editors and they ask if they can write the story, because a lot of time they don't want to be spending their hours and their research and their interview time you know, putting together this wonderful story that gets axed before they can even, you know, put it out there. So yeah, a lot of the time how it goes is I will send a message to a reporter, sometimes to an editor, if I think it's something that could work for many of the people on the team, but often it's directly to a reporter. And then they will go to their editor and say, hey, I think this could be a really good story because X, Y, Z, this would be perfect for this reason. And they have their little talks amongst each other and then decide whether or not it's okay to publish. But yes, that happens often where we'll have a reporter who's interested and then the editor might say, you know what, not going to work for us.
Got it. Yeah, it sounds like it's very relationship heavy and you have to keep tabs of where they're at, what publications they're at, what stories they're interested in, or maybe what stories their employer or the publication wants to push in that moment, and trends as well. So I imagine there's a lot of juggling.
No, yeah. And then like knowing personally, like where they're at, if they're at a conference, if they're on vacation, if they're, you know, somewhere else, what time zone they're in. There are a lot of like little details, but that's why it's called public relations. So a lot of people will try to start their outreach like a couple of weeks before the big announcement. You know, you've got your TGE coming up and you're like, ooh, okay, now let's start reaching out to reporters. Now let's start talking to them. If that's the time that you're starting, you're too late. I'm sorry to say it, but you're way too late. You need to be telling your story for months in advance and all over the place so that you're prepped for that big splash, because reporters, they should have already heard of you in one way or another prior to actually covering you. I think it takes like an average of 7 times or something hearing a brand's name before people will actually recognize and remember it. So you need to make sure that the reporters have had several chances to see you before you slide into their DMs, which means You need to have your sites up to date. If you've got a new mission statement or a new one-liner, all of that should be out there and available, because they will be looking at that and pulling information from your site when they're doing their research. You should also have your spokespeople clearly identified with specific lanes that they talk about. So maybe one guy does the tech, one guy does the overarching overview of things, and one guy is really good with regulatory conversations. And so he can step in for that every once in a while. But you need to really spend your time working on this, build your relationships, get on the X Spaces, the podcasts, any little like commentary opportunity that you can get, just so that your name is out there, your organization's name is out there, and you start capturing some of that mind share so that you can make that big splash. But the most important piece of all of this is knowing your why. Why do you exist? Why are you necessary right now? And why should people give a shit about it? Just be loud about that. Like, get a megaphone and speak about that everywhere. The more that you do that, the more attention that you're going to get from the media, and the easier it will be to get your news through. Okay, so when it comes to our priorities, obviously every single story, or every good story, has a really solid who, what, why, and how. We've all heard that before. But when we're putting an announcement together, the thing that we think is most important, usually, or the way that we want to structure how we talk about it, is what's going on and how does it work. But that's not what the media cares about, unfortunately. So the media actually really cares about the why. Your why is the most important thing. Like I said, why right now? Why is this important? Why is it necessary? Why should people give a shit? And then the next big chunk of that is who. Who's going to be interested? Who's going to benefit from it? Who are the people in your community and slightly outside of it? That's what a reporter is going to be thinking about. Why does this matter, and who is going to be interested? And if that can't be answered well with your story or with the announcement that you have, it's very unlikely that you're going to get your coverage, even if the what and the how are really cool. So when you're putting your announcement together and you're answering that what and how, there are really only two things that you need to do. You need to answer what's happening and how did it happen. That can be done in 3 or 4 sentences, honestly. And there is, I do have an example of a press release in a little bit that will show you just exactly how much what and how is there in that press release. All right, so the what and how is simple, but the why and who can actually be a little bit more complicated. So when you're thinking about the why, like I said, why is it important? What does it do for your community, for the ecosystem, for the future of crypto, et cetera, et cetera? There needs to be an urgent driving force behind this to make people want to learn more or read into the story. But also timing. Why right now? Like, what's the need for this to be happening at this very moment? Why do we have to talk about this today and not tomorrow or 2 weeks from now? What makes it super relevant to everybody in this exact moment? And why should people give a shit? Like, what way are they benefiting from this? Is it, are they maybe going to get an airdrop or something like that? Is it, a better user experience? Is it that your grandma can now trade crypto with you because it's a 2-button press thing? There needs to be a solid reason for a broad audience to really care about this. And then when you're thinking about who do you want to care? That's the first question, honestly. Who do you want to care about this? And then who is actually going to care about this? Because those two audiences might be a little separate. If you're a super, dev-focused product, maybe, something in like Fortune isn't going to make sense right now until there's something bigger that a broader audience can be interested in. So who do you want to be caring about you? And then who's actually going to be caring about you? You can kind of narrow down your audience through that. And then once you figured out who that audience is or what those different audiences are, who is going to be genuinely interested in talking about this? Because that's going to be your access to that audience that you want to get to. Yeah, I've been talking for a while. Emily, help me out.
No, I was going to say that I know this sounds very simple. It's just like 4 words, right? Why, who, what, and how. But I would say these two are probably what makes a bulk of the marketing strategy and why having a PR team is so helpful. Because like the why and who, they're kind of connected, as well as the relevancy. Like if you were to pitch a story on the metaverse right now, it's going to be very different than pitching it in 2021.
Yes.
So a lot of these concepts and frameworks we often use outside of just PR, which is a domain of go-to-market and marketing. And it's really thinking about how do we connect the dots and make this very compelling campaign or story that is connecting to the right people. And relevancy is something that I find is harder and harder to maintain in current times where there's so much information and everyone is prying for attention. So I think having all of these factors in mind and knowing who are the right people that would be willing to write about the story in PR is so important. And then it's also like the other thing that's interesting is PR is also like a, we say crypto can be B to B to C, meaning sometimes it's an infrastructure play where your business model is attracting other infrastructure or business partners. But because you have a token, there's a consumer element. Mm-hmm. In PR, you have to attract the reporter who needs to attract the reader. So there's multiple audiences that you're reaching out to get a story to finally land in a publisher.
Yeah, there are multiple constantly moving pieces in the equation. Okay. I don't want you guys to think about that I forgot about the when and where, because obviously there's, all of those in that however many phrased thing, who, what, where, when, why, and how. But those are also very important. First things first, make sure that you're actually ready to make the announcement. I know you're really excited. I know you've been working on this for months, if not years, and people are asking, when is this going to drop? When are we going to see this new upgrade? When are we going to see whatever? It's best to be ready and announce a couple days after you're ready than it is to say that you're going to make an announcement and then you have to pull all the stops and call the reporters and make them cancel their publications. That will lose you coverage and it will really hurt the relationship. So being ready is an absolute must. Always make sure that you are ready to go and the announcement is good to go, because if we've sent the news out under embargo or sent it to a reporter and they say, okay, we're going to publish this at 9 a.m. today, they can still go forward with that news, even if we try to pull it. I've never had that happen, not yet, but I've had a relationship ruined with a reporter over it. So seriously, be ready. I cannot stress that enough. And then, of course, try to avoid, if you can, sharing your news at the same time as others. I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but I have heard there are so many people making huge announcements in September. September is going to be a crazy month for us. If you know that there are going to be a bunch of other people in the space announcing at the same time or around an event or around, a particular date, it's not the best to jump on that train unless you really think you can knock everybody else out of the park. But even still, there's going to be so much attention going all over the place. It's best to avoid those heavy news moments and capture as much attention as you can for yourself. And pick a date that's really convenient for reporters. Please do not ever announce something on a weekend unless you want to make it a Twitter thing. Like, we shouldn't be asking reporters to work on the weekends, and they typically do not. So a big announcement or something that you want to get out there, make sure it's during the week and preferably in the middle of the week. Typically, if there's something that happened over the weekend, reporters will want to cover that on a Monday, and that can make it really tough. If you've got something that you want to announce, it's not as big as that news that came in over the weekend. And then Fridays, people like to take long weekends and vacations and all those kinds of things. So if you want to make sure that you're getting everybody when they're in the office, do it Tuesday through Thursday. I think there was one more piece to that. I'm sorry. There was a where. So make sure that you're focusing on the regions that make sense for you. If you're based in the US, maybe you want to be focusing on US media. If you want to be branching out, maybe you think of some of those regions that haven't been talking about you as much and do targeted approaches there. And then think about the outlets that actually fit your intended audiences. There's a slide on this coming up, but just because you want that really top tier publication, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where your audience lives. So think about that when you're thinking about where you really want to go with your news. And the last thing on this slide, and then we'll move on. I highly recommend against announcing at an event unless you are the main attraction. And the reason behind that is everybody is busy. They're going to like all these different panels and speaking events and side events, and they're all over the place. The reporters who are there usually don't have time to write. They're on ground, they're learning, they're interviewing, they're researching. To ask them to be reporting while they're there is asking them to juggle a bunch of knives on fire. So I always recommend to do your announcement before the event. That way you can talk about the news all throughout the event. Because a lot of people, they'll wait until like the last day or the end of the event, and then they'll drop all this news. And you've wasted 50% of your time on ground at this event, not being able to talk about the most exciting thing that you're there for. So I always say do it before the event, capture that attention while people aren't busy, and then you've got the whole event to talk about everything that you just did. Okay, this one is a little bit spicy, but we got to get the priorities straight. So everybody wants Forbes. 90% of the clients who come in, when they come in for PR, they say, I want Forbes. Can you get me in Forbes? And of course, we can do that, but it's going to take some time depending on where you're at. So if we think about where you've been, where you've shown up, let's go one step up from there. That should be our next goal. So if you've had a couple of placements here and there, maybe in some smaller publications, but it's not that frequent, or maybe you've been covered a couple times before, but you're showing up in like your partner's news, or you're just showing up as like a little mention here and there. It's not a feature story about you guys. I would consider that a tier 3, and that's where we need to start building up towards tier 2, consistent placements. And you can work your way up towards those tier 1, really large publications like Forbes, like Business Insider, like Wall Street Journal. But, based on where you're at and where you're showing up, we need to be looking to that next step to figure out where it makes sense for you to be going. And sometimes that'll take a little bit of time, but if you work those steps and you climb up that ladder, you can get to Forbes literally within 6 months.
That's crazy. Because I wanted to touch on that, because earlier you said how there wasn't a time frame on it, but you said don't rush it. So you've seen this whole process happen in 6 months from your experience.
I've seen the whole process happen in 6 months, but it has to be done impeccably well. And it requires, there are a lot of moving pieces. Yes. Yeah, that's very true, Joseph. But there are so many moving pieces in all of this, and it makes it really, really tough sometimes. But it also can make it really, really easy to rise to the top. If you've got an impeccable CEO or a really great spokesperson who is a great speaker, and they show up to all of the opportunities they possibly can, they're talking all the time and they're talking really well about it, plus an awesome product or offering or solution for something that everybody really gets and understands. If you've got all of those pieces, yeah, you can get to Forbes in 6 months, and I've seen it happen more than once.
Cool.
Okay, so when we're thinking about, do we want Forbes, do we want CoinDesk, do we want maybe like a research newsletter like Messari or something like that, we really need to think, yeah, who is going to make sense for this story? Does their audience actually overlap with yours? I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but like if what you're working on right now or the announcement that you have is heavily developer focused, maybe Forbes doesn't make sense for that right now. Maybe we go to something a little bit more technically inclined. So, think about all of that and really consider the audiences of that publication and of that reporter too. Is that audience going to engage with you? Are they going to be interested in you? Or are they just going to scroll past the article? Because if that's the case, then you don't want to be published there right now. And of course, does the story fit the reporter's beat? Is it something that they show interest in regularly? Is it something that they know a lot about and can talk about well? You want to make sure that your story is written well. And so you got to pick a good reporter who's going to write about it in the best way possible. And I'm not just saying like a positive story, because we can't necessarily control that. Sometimes reporters will do what they want. But it's really about, is this something that fits for them and they can talk about in a smart way that's going to put you in a good light. And yeah, everything needs to be sold. Like I said earlier, there needs to be some kind of sale. So when you're selling your story to a reporter, does it feel like they got a bargain? Does it feel like a win for them? Are they excited to be publishing about you? Do they think that it's going to draw more attention and traction to themselves as a reporter, to their publication, et cetera? If it feels like a win for them and a win for you, that's the reporter that you need to be going for. And then to find the right reporter, it's going to take some time. You really need to start reading the news and check out each of the outlets that you're interested in every single day. The people on our team, all of us, I think we spend at least an hour each every single day just reading the news and seeing what people are talking about, not just in those publications, but also on Twitter, also on LinkedIn. You got to go all over the place and see where they're talking. They're also in Telegram groups too. So, really spend the time seeing where they're at, what they're talking about, what they're writing about, and get to know them, not just for your own purposes, but as a person, because that's where the relationship kind of steps in there. And then just some extra tips for making it a little easier and automating things. You can, of course, make alerts for your keywords. Google Alerts are really helpful. There's actually like an RSS feed that you can do with your Google Alerts that will send it straight to your Slack if you want. So you can get real-time pings on everything or almost everything. And then there are also paid applications, which we use a couple of them to really monitor things and track mindshare. And of course, ask your AI, but do your own research. AI is great, but I literally just went on there and asked, so what are some of the great reporters in the industry? And half of them had moved somewhere else or had different beats at this point. So you really got to do a lot of manual work to make sure you're not pitching someone the wrong story.
There's probably a workflow there where you could scrape and pull in all of the latest crypto news from all the biggest publications, and it goes into some data pool, and then you can use AI or an LLM to then organize it for you or understand sentiments like, okay, this reporter, there's patterns, like this reporter is reporting about this topic. So there probably is going to be more and more tooling that helps, but I know there's some pretty traditional PR tools that you currently use or the team uses.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to name some of the tools that we use?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Like, what are your favorite tools that you've seen are industry standard and have been really helpful?
Yeah. The best tools to use, I would say, are Meltwater and Muckrack. Both have their different purposes. We're really more on Meltwater at this point because it gives a great breakdown on mindshare over time, where people have shown up, level of sentiment. You could do a deep dive on reporters too and see what they've been writing about, maybe how their interests have shifted, or if they've got new focuses that are coming in. So those are really helpful for aggregating the information, much better than AI is at this point, I will say. But you still got to do that manual work and really like check in on things. Meltwater, and I believe Muckrack doesn't do this either, but there's not really that much of an insight into what people are saying on Twitter as much, or like an aggregation of that data of what they're talking about on Twitter outside of like Kaido or Cookie, you know, one of those. But for the PR realm, most of the time you'll see people using Meltwater and Muckrack or Prowly. Okay, so now the fun part, how to do the announcements and the pitching. You've got your reporter figured out, you've got your why figured out, you've got the date and everything set up. Now you just need to put the materials together and actually act on it. And this is usually, as a client, where you see the PR people come in.
So this is all about the sales part.
This is, yeah, this is about the sales part. Okay, so a press release, it should not be like a blog. If you're taking your blog article that you're going to put on your own website and you're just copying it and pasting it and calling that a press release, stop that right now. I don't want to see that ever again. That's not a press release. Press releases are designed to be like one of the most boring pieces of information that you're going to read, but it's because it's a fact sheet. It's like an informational sheet to help reporters write their organic story. You want to share the most important details in the clearest way possible. You don't want to mince your words. You don't want to use a bunch of fancy language that people aren't going to understand. This needs to be plain, clear, and simple, like an instruction manual. It's also not a place to share your thoughts or your opinions or do one of those like DJ Khaled, we the best music things. Like that's not the moment in the press release. Everything needs to be factual and informational and straight to the point. And when you have your announcement or when you're ready to release all of the news, you want to make sure that you're sharing it widely and securing maximum coverage. So that is an instance where if you're sharing it widely, it may get like copied and pasted. But initially, when you're sharing it with reporters like under embargo, et cetera, which I'll talk about in a second, that's really just supposed to be an info sheet. And I've got an example of one here, which I copied and pasted. So it looks like an internal document. This was actually published by Binance on PR Newswire. So it is open public information. I'm not sharing anybody's private stuff. But it's hard to read here. We don't really need to read through it. But the idea is there's a very clear and concise headline. You can tell what's going on immediately before diving into the whole thing. And the what and the how are very, very small sections. Those are the first two paragraphs. Explains, okay, what's going on? How is it happening? And then the rest of this whole thing is all about who is this important for and why is it important? And in the quotes, if you want to, they didn't do it here, but if you want to, the quote is where you can add a little bit of opinion or a little bit of extra spice. But everything else in here should all be factual and informational and really, really clearly giving that who, what, how, why. And then if you want to get sexy with it, that's where the pitch comes in. It should always be individually tailored to each reporter. If you're doing like a broad, wide blast of the news, you don't necessarily have to do that. But if you're not being personal with them, expect them not to be personal with you, and they will copy and paste that press release and just share it as is. So when you are reaching out, though, make sure that you're really grabbing attention. Do not ever have a boring subject line. And if you're like in Telegram or something like that, make sure that the first like couple of sentences that you use are impactful, because that's going to be the little like preview that they see on their screen before they open up your message. So if you write something like, GM, I hope you're doing well this week. I just wanted to talk to you about, that's your whole preview right there. They have no idea what you want to talk about or why you're reaching out to them. They're going to flip past it. They're not going to pay attention. So really think about those first few words that you use to grab that attention and get them hooked. Also, I think every pitch should be incredibly short. I have had some clients ask to see pitches and they'll always want to turn it into like a giant overstuffed cheeseburger of a thing. The shorter, the sweeter, the better. I have a 150 word maximum limit on my pitches. They should be focused pretty much primarily on the why. But this is where you really add the opinion or the other facts or relevant news or context or things that are going on right now that can kind of give a little extra meat to the announcement. It's not what the announcement actually is, but it brings that overarching why into focus that much more. So that's what you can do in the pitch is say everything that you didn't want to say or that you couldn't say in the press release. You can say that in the pitch. Just make it really, really short. And don't give up all the goodies. You should not have every piece of information in the pitch. If the reporter can literally write the news from the pitch that you sent them, you did it wrong. The whole point of the pitch is to grab their attention and get them to respond, get them to ask more so that you can reel them in and get that interview and then have an incredible story that they spend good time on.
I think this topic is so important because I can only imagine how many messages a day reporters get.
Mm-hmm.
So Jake, our CEO, has written a post all about how to slide into DMs from the context of pitching yourself for a job. And then myself, I get a lot of cold DMs. Sometimes it's bots, sometimes it's spam, but there's no realistic way I can reply to everything. And I think how you capture someone's attention in that first message is very much like a first impression when you meet someone in real life. And you do need to be considerate of people's time, especially if most of their day they're getting a ton of other stories or messages trying to pry for their attention. I literally got a message about 2 hours ago. It was like, hey, Emily, we have a product launch on Monday. I know it's last minute. Can you make this video for us? And that made me feel a little bit, it made me feel a little triggered. I was like, am I just, I don't know who you are. I don't know what the product is. I don't think I've ever spoke to you. And you're just expecting me to make a video for your product. Mm-hmm. So there was no benefit to me or like why I should care about that. And it was a very like brash way to get my attention. Mm-hmm. But I think understanding exactly what the reporter cares about, what are the stories that they want to write about and why it would help their publication are ways you can kind of craft that initial message, at least in the context of reaching out to a reporter.
Okay, so I have an example of a pitch here, which is going to lead into the case study they've got with Bear Baddies. But basically, this is really like what I did. Do I think this is the best pitch ever? No, but it got the job done. I had spoken with this person's colleague ahead of time. It was actually their editor, just to see if they thought that this was something they'd be interested in. But Emily, like you said, you felt kind of triggered because these people came to you, you didn't know them, you'd never worked with them before, and they're asking for like a quick turnaround video from you. That would kind of be a turnoff, right? So good news is there was an existing relationship with this reporter. And so the first thing that I said to them is, hey, I have a story for you that is for tomorrow. And it just came across my desk. I know this is not the most convenient right now, but I still wanted to see if you're interested in it anyway. So I grabbed the attention. I said, hey, I talked to your editor. They think this would be a good story for you. I know that this is like a really tight turnaround, but if you're interested, let's work together. So I'm being friendly, I'm being understandable. And then you got to give a really clear why. So Bear Baddies had their first product launch that was coming out. It was the Bear Baddies and Concrete Vault, basically like a one-click vault. Very, very cool. But a key piece in this is a couple weeks prior, there was a video that Bear Baddies had posted that actually got like a lot of traction and attention online. some of which was relatively negative, especially from the male community, and basically kind of calling into question, like, oh, are the Bear Baddies legit? Like, you know, are they just girls having fun or whatever? And so this was an opportunity, this announcement, not only to kind of clear the air after that video came out, but really establish, hey, the Bear Baddies are here. They're doing something real, and they're simplifying DeFi for the rest of us. And you'll actually see in a couple of slides, the line that I used, simplifying DeFi for the rest of us, it ends up in the headline. So this is a very short, I actually counted it to make sure it fit my minimum or maximum, and it's 148 words. So this is about as long as I would let myself get. But it's not a perfect pitch. It's human, but it hits the important points that got that reporter's attention. And then I feel like there should be a little explanation of different kinds of pitching that you will hear from your PR team, and this will be important if you're doing it yourself. So there is exclusive pitching, embargo pitching, and wide pitching. Exclusive pitching, it makes sense, it's in the name. That means that you're only working with one reporter or one person to talk about this whole story. So you're not sharing this with other people, you're only giving it to one person. The reason why this is appealing to a lot of people is it's easier to get the higher tier targets. Most of the higher tier reporters or higher tier publications are going to only want exclusives. They won't be interested in publishing if somebody else is writing about it at the same time or has already written about it. So it's a really nice way to get your news covered by one of those top tier places, but it'll only show up in one spot. And you're going to have some risks with that too. If you put all of your eggs in one basket, you can't guarantee that everything is going to go through perfectly, or that something won't happen, or et cetera, et cetera. The reporter might flake, you know, you can't guarantee coverage. And if you only give yourself maybe 3 or 4 days before the announcement, which please don't do that. But if you do, then you've only got 3 or 4 reporters that you can reach out to before it's time for your announcement to go live. So you've got to be very careful and very calculative when you do an exclusive, but it's a great option. Then there's embargo pitching, which casts a bit of a broader net, and that happens before the announcement goes live. So the word embargo means not ready until a later date and time. So you can't share any of that information until a specified date and time. So when I reached out to that reporter, I didn't give them like a specific embargo time because I didn't have one, but I knew that it was for tomorrow. So you can't tell anybody about this news until tomorrow. And that makes it so you can kind of prep reporters, give them a little bit of time to write. And you can also be fairly sure that you've secured whoever you've secured, and count on some of those publications coming through. That doesn't mean it happens every time. And because it's under embargo, reporters might be like, well, you know, if somebody else is going to write about this, and I don't really think I want to, so I'm just going to pass on that. I'd prefer an exclusive. So there is some risk in that too. And then the last one is wide pitching, which should be done pretty much every time you have an announcement. Once your news is live, whether you've posted that on Twitter or you've had an exclusive announcement go out and your person has published, once that is live and the news is broken, that's when you share that press release in an email and you go out to as many people as makes sense. I wouldn't do a spray and pray approach, which is where you just like email like 400 people and hope that some of them will share the news, because that could actually land you on a really solid reporter's spam list. So when you're doing that wide pitching, be thoughtful and maybe reach out to some of those like hello@blockworks.com or whatever, you know. And then I do have to say some hard things here. When it comes to earned media, you're going to lose coverage. At some point, it's going to happen. If you have enough announcements, it will happen. When it's your fault is if you change the announcement date. I went on a big diatribe earlier about like you got to be ready. Please be ready. Don't change your announcement date the morning of, because it'll be a whole scramble and reporters will hate everyone. It's your fault if you don't get coverage, if you change your announcement date, point blank. If you give a really quick turnaround time on reporters and they can't write because they've got like 48 hours and 2 other stories and it's Trump coin season and everything is blowing up, you need to give them ample time. So if you don't give them enough time, it is your fault if you don't get that coverage. Or if you break your own embargo. So let's say you told the reporter, hey, we've got this story. It's going to be out next Wednesday at 10 a.m. ET. And then on Tuesday, you say, hey, tomorrow at 10 a.m., we're going to drop this thing. You just broke your own embargo. The reporter's going to be mad at you, and they probably won't write after that. So be really careful with that. And then, choosing a really poor time for it. Like I said, Trump coin, an event, a holiday, election season, those kinds of things where attention's going to be pulled elsewhere is not the time to try to be shouting about what you do. And then where it's not your fault, where it's just life happens, sometimes the reporter will have to go to another story that they've been assigned, even if they really like yours, even if they really want to write about it. Sometimes they're pulled in other directions and they have to do what they're told. So that sucks, but it happens sometimes. And that's usually in an instance where there's some crazy news that breaks and it steals attention from your announcement. Or maybe the reporter gets sick, or maybe they double booked themselves, or maybe they forgot. Every single thing on this list has happened more than once. And I've personally dealt with it. So you will lose coverage sometimes. Don't lose hope. Keep a good attitude and just keep chugging along. You will get that really solid story next time around.
So basically, there's some times where things are just not in your control, as life is.
No, that's how life goes. And really quickly, we've got a little success story because I love the baddies so very much. But they also were really wonderful to work with. And I kind of want to highlight that too. So first off, the baddies had a really clear who, what, why, and how for their announcement. All of those elements were there. So it was easy to put the materials together. It was easy to write the pitch. But the most important factors in why this went well was that their team was incredibly flexible. What you didn't see in that message exchange with the reporter was that they said, hey, I am interested in this, but I can't write about it tomorrow. I might be able to write about it this Friday. And when I came back to the Bear Baddies team and I told them that, they said, hey, let's give that reporter more time. Let's do the story next Tuesday so they have ample time to interview and to write and to get everything done the right way. And it made it so much easier for everybody involved, where the reporter had time to interview, they had time to write, they had time for extra questions, and they wrote a really phenomenal story for Bear Baddies. Another thing about the team was that they were super quick. So any questions that came in, any approvals that were needed, they were absolutely on it so that we could turn around and get shit done and reach out to the reporter and edit this and grab this piece of information and source all of this stuff. Everything came together really quickly within a matter of a few hours, honestly. But it was because that team was so great to work with and so understanding that everything ended up pushing through to that awesome finish line. And yeah, I mean, I can't sing the baddies' praises enough. They answered all the questions that came in. They also actually had an interview with another reporter and they didn't publish. So even in this instance, there was coverage that was lost. But regardless, we still had a feature story on the front page of Blockworks, which resulted in a 175% increase in media attention and 8 syndications across a bunch of different crypto publications, literally across the world. And then obviously a boost in credibility after some of the things that were going on online. So it was a really awesome campaign to be a part of and to work on, but it was so successful because of how great the baddies were to work with.
What was the exact timeline from inception to actually getting the story out?
So this is a timeline I would not recommend, but they came to us on a Wednesday. They had the announcement coming out the next day, and I was like, this is going to be real hard, but let's try to pull some strings. And it ended up that the announcement went out the following Tuesday. So it was a 4-day business day turnaround. So yeah,
So
it was a quick one.
it shows what's possible when you have the right reporter, when
Yes.
you have the why, the how, the what, and the where.
Yeah, where well, if it all kind of fits together nicely, you can make magic happen. But what I will say is it doesn't go like that every single time. So the more time that you can give for the reporters, if you've got like a week or 2 weeks before that announcement date, it makes it a lot easier. But this one worked out incredibly well, and everyone involved was wonderful to work with. But yeah, if anybody has more questions about this or they want a deeper dive into how this stuff works, happy to talk to you. Happy to share more information or anything that you need. Or comment on this live stream and ask the questions there, and I'll respond to you there too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anastasia, for just going over this past hour on how to actually get stories out there for free. I know this QR code goes to your X. If anyone wants to learn more about what we do at Hype, whether it's PR or all of the other service lines we have, I guess comment or DM and we can share that with you as well. Otherwise, if there are any questions about anything that was discussed today, since there was a lot of different slides, yeah, just comment and then someone from the PR team will help you out.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. And I'm sorry for talking like nonstop for literally an hour, but I love you all.
Awesome. Thank you.